Why does your daughter keep calling me mommy?
The question cut through the glass lobby like it was meant to sting, sharp enough for everyone to hear. The woman in the tailored suit didn't lower her voice. She didn't need to. Security slowed. 2 executives near the elevators turned. Even the marble floor seemed to hold its breath as the implication settled, an accusation wrapped in mockery, aimed squarely at the man in work boots holding a dented toolbox. "She follows you around like that," the CEO added, eyes flicking to the child's small hand gripping his sleeve. "It's confusing. Maybe you should explain your situation better." He didn't answer right away. He just felt the weight of the moment, how quickly dignity could be questioned when power decided to smile cruelly. He adjusted the strap of his toolbox, calm in a way that felt almost out of place, and looked past her, already measuring things no one else noticed. "By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." Because what was really happening here had nothing to do with titles or labels. It was about who people thought mattered. He finally spoke, voice even, unshaken, thanking her for her concern as if she'd offered kindness instead of humiliation. No anger, no apology, just control. Somewhere above them, deep in the building's bones, a warning hum began, soft, almost polite. And soon, everyone in that lobby would understand why he hadn't flinched. He had learned long ago that reacting was a luxury. Standing there, shoulders squared but relaxed, he let the insult pass through him instead of landing. The man in the uniform wasn't there to win words. He was there to get through the night and get his kid home safe. The little girl looked up at him, confused more than hurt, and that mattered more than the laughter he heard behind the polished smiles. He shifted his stance, grounding himself. Calm wasn't weakness. It was a choice. The CEO turned away first, already bored, already convinced the exchange was over. For her, it was just another reminder of hierarchy. For him, it was a line drawn quietly in his chest. He moved when security waved him through, guiding his daughter toward the service corridor without rushing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, familiar and steady, a sound that told him things were almost, but not quite, right. He had worked this tower long enough to know its moods, the way vibrations traveled through the steel, the way silence could mean danger. As they passed the elevator bank, he felt it again, a subtle lag, a half-second delay that shouldn't exist. His fingers tightened on the toolbox handle. Behind them, the lobby resumed its rhythm. Shoes clicked. Conversations restarted. The CEO laughed softly at something an assistant said, already dismissing the man and child from memory. In the service hallway, the air was cooler, heavier with the smell of metal and cleaning solution. This was where he belonged. According to the rules, everyone followed without thinking, where people like him fixed problems quietly and disappeared before anyone asked their names. He knelt to his daughter's level, brushing her hair back gently. "You okay?" She nodded, trusting him completely, unaware of the layers moving around them. She had called the woman Mommy because children reached for warmth instinctively, not because they understood power. That innocence tightened something in his chest. He stood again as a low alarm chirped once, then stopped. A test signal, most people would assume. He knew better. He'd designed systems like this once, before life folded in on itself, before grief rewrote his priorities. Upstairs, preparations for a major audit continued, lights blazing, servers straining under rehearsed perfection. Down here, in the veins of the building, something was slipping. He keyed into a maintenance panel, scanning readouts faster than anyone would expect. Temperature variance, access delays, minor on paper. Catastrophic if ignored. This wasn't about proving anything. It never had been. It was about timing. about being ready when pretending stopped working. Footsteps echoed behind him. Another tech passing by, nodding without curiosity. To them, he was just another night worker doing rounds. That anonymity was armor. He closed the panel and exhaled slowly. The night had just started, and already the building was asking questions its leadership couldn't answer. Somewhere above, the woman who'd mocked him trusted that money and authority would smooth every edge. She believed systems obeyed titles. He knew better. He took his daughter's hand and started deeper into the corridor, toward the heart of the tower, listening to the subtle changes in sound and pressure that told him the truth no one upstairs was ready to hear. The corridor narrowed as they moved deeper, the polished world above fading into pipes, conduits, and concrete walls that remembered every mistake ever buried behind them. The hum he'd noticed earlier wasn't gone. It had shifted, like a warning changing pitch once it realized it was being ignored. He slowed his pace, not stopping, just listening harder. His daughter's sneakers scuffed softly beside him, the sound grounding him in a way nothing else could. Behind a steel panel, coolant pumps cycled too fast, compensating for something upstream. He didn't need a screen to tell him that. The floor vibrated differently under his boots. At the end of the corridor, the service elevator stood open, its interior light flickering once before stabilizing. He hesitated for half a breath, then guided her inside and keyed the manual override. The doors closed with a dull thud that echoed longer than it should have. As the elevator descended, he replayed the lobby in his mind, not the words, but the posture. The certainty with which power assumed it could define him. He'd seen that certainty before, years ago, in rooms where decisions were made that never touched the people who paid for them. Back then, he'd worn a suit instead of a badge. Back then, he'd believed good systems could outlast bad leadership. The elevator shuddered once. He steadied it instinctively, palm against the wall, feeling the vibration settle. His daughter looked up, eyes wide but calm, because she trusted the way he didn't panic. "It's okay," he said softly, more for the space than for her. When the doors opened again, they stepped into the maintenance hub, a low-ceilinged room dense with the smell of warm metal and ozone. Racks of equipment lined the walls, status lights blinking in uneven rhythms. He crossed to the central console and scanned the board. 3 subsystems were compensating for a fault that hadn't been logged. That meant someone upstairs had overridden an alert. He felt a flicker of anger then, quick and contained. Not at the failure. At the arrogance that assumed consequences could be postponed indefinitely. He settled his daughter onto a rolling chair near the wall, handed her his phone with a familiar game loaded, and turned back to the console. Fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking redundancies, tracing signal paths. The building wasn't broken yet. It was tired, overworked, pushed for appearances instead of resilience. Footsteps approached the doorway. A junior facilities supervisor leaned in, tablet in hand, eyes already sliding past him. "We're supposed to keep this area clear tonight," the supervisor said, distracted. "Executive directive." He didn't look up right away. "Then, you might want to tell them the east cooling loop's running at 90% and climbing." The supervisor blinked, frowned at the tablet. "That can't be right. Ops didn't flag anything." "They won't, not until it trips." Silence stretched. The supervisor hesitated, torn between protocol and the uneasy feeling that something was off. "I'll check with control," they muttered, already backing away. He returned to the console, jaw set. This was how it always went. Warnings softened until they were safe to ignore. Upstairs, preparations intensified, screens glowed, voices overlapped. Somewhere above them, the CEO was likely reassuring someone that everything was under control. He could picture it. The smile, the confidence, the faith in dashboards that only told comfortable truths. A subtle alarm chirped again, longer this time. He exhaled slowly and logged the anomaly under maintenance review, knowing full well it would be buried under higher priority optics. The system accepted the input, then flashed amber instead of green. That was new. His daughter looked over from the chair. "Daddy, I'm here," he said immediately. She smiled and went back to her game. He straightened, rolling his shoulders once. There were moments when he wondered if keeping his head down had been the right choice. Moments when silence felt like complicity. But then he looked at her, safe for now, and remembered why he'd chosen invisibility in the first place. A message pinged on the wall display. An automated notice about access restrictions tightening across upper floors. That was bad timing. Isolation protocols layered on top of a stressed system could turn inconvenience into disaster. He reached for his radio, thumb hovering over the button. Calling this in would put him back on the radar. Staying quiet would keep him small. By the way, if you want to see where this is headed and how fast things unravel, subscribe with the bell on, because this night is only getting tighter. He lowered his hand without transmitting. Not yet. First, he needed proof. The hum deepened, resonating through the floor like a held breath. Somewhere, a server bank shifted load. Somewhere else, a lock hesitated before engaging. He leaned closer to the console, eyes narrowing, already mapping the cascade in his head. They thought they had time. They thought power insulated them. The building disagreed. The building disagreed, and it made that clear in ways most people never noticed. A pressure change whispered through the ductwork, followed by a faint click as a relay tried and failed to seat properly. He felt it through the soles of his boots before any screen bothered to acknowledge it. He straightened slowly, eyes still on the console. Amber lights multiplied, not enough to trigger panic upstairs, just enough to force systems to borrow strength from places they shouldn't. That was how collapses began. Not with noise, but with quiet theft. He reached up and toggled a diagnostic layer most maintenance staff never touched. It wasn't restricted, just ignored, buried under menus executives assumed no one needed anymore. The data scrolled, uneven and raw. Someone had ordered performance boosts without structural compensation. Someone had chosen optics over endurance. A vibration ran through the wall to his left. He pressed his palm against it, feeling the rhythm. Too fast, too eager. Machines behaving like that didn't break immediately. They waited until witnesses arrived. Behind him, a door opened and closed. Another tech crossed the room, humming softly, oblivious. The man watched him pass, then looked back to the board. "Not yet," he murmured, mostly to himself. Upstairs, the executive floors were alive with rehearsed confidence. Glass walls reflected tailored suits and digital projections of perfection. Assistants moved fast, carrying tablets and coffee, repeating the same reassurance. Everything was on schedule. The CEO stood near the center of it all, posture flawless, voice calm. This was her element, controlled, curated, compliant. Down here, control was an illusion. A soft chime echoed through the hub as an automated test cycle initiated early. He frowned. That wasn't planned. He keyed into the log, tracing the command back through layers of authorization until he found the source. Executive override, no signature attached. That meant it had been rushed. His jaw tightened. He could stop it now with a few keystrokes. A quiet correction, uncredited, unnoticed. The system would stabilize. The night would pass, and nothing would change. He'd done that before, too many times. Another tremor rippled through the floor, stronger this time. A warning light blinked red, then settled back to amber, like a lie correcting itself. He glanced toward his daughter. She'd curled her legs under her on the chair, phone forgotten, watching the lights with a seriousness that didn't belong to someone her age. She trusted him to know what to do. That trust weighed more than the toolbox ever had. He keyed the radio once, then stopped. Protocol demanded escalation through layers that would filter and delay. By the time approval came, the problem would have grown teeth. Footsteps returned, faster now. The junior supervisor reappeared, breath slightly uneven. "Ops says readings are within acceptable variance," they said, forcing confidence. "They told me to stand down." He met their eyes for the first time. Acceptable for who? The supervisor hesitated. "Look, I don't make the calls." "No," he said quietly. "You just live with them." Another alarm chirped, sharper. Somewhere above, a door reader stalled, then granted access on a second attempt. Small things. Accumulating. The supervisor's tablet pinged, their expression shifted. "There's a delay on the East Bank elevators," he nodded once. "First domino." "What?" "Nothing." He turned back to the console, fingers already moving. He isolated a subsystem, rerouting load with a precision that came from memory, not manuals. The board responded reluctantly, lights flickering as if offended. The supervisor watched, confused. "You're not authorized to—" "I am, if I'm right." The words landed heavier than he intended. Silence followed, thick and uncertain. The supervisor stepped back, torn between reporting him and watching the impossible become possible. Upstairs, the first ripple of inconvenience surfaced. An assistant frowned at a frozen screen. A projector lagged before correcting. Someone laughed it off. Minor glitches always happened, especially in old buildings. He exhaled slowly, sweat cooling at the base of his neck. The system stabilized, just enough. He'd bought time, not fixed anything. Bought it? The question was what to do with it. He logged the intervention under maintenance, detailed and precise, knowing it would be reviewed eventually. After the damage, not before. That was the pattern. He saved the file twice, then backed out. The hum shifted again. Deeper now, like a warning growing impatient. He turned, meeting his daughter's gaze. She smiled when he looked at her, unafraid. That smile decided it. He picked up the radio. "Facilities to control," he said, voice steady. "You're running blind, and if you don't slow the executive overrides, this place is going to make the decision for you." Static answered. Then a pause. Above them, the CEO tilted her head as someone whispered in her ear, irritation flashing briefly before she masked it. She gestured sharply, already framing the narrative in her mind. Down below, he waited, hand resting on the console, listening as the building gathered itself for the next move. Static crackled once, then cleared. Control finally answered, clipped and dismissive, asking him to repeat himself slower, as if urgency was a language problem. He did, trimming nothing, letting the facts stand without decoration. When he finished, there was another pause, longer this time. "Noted," the voice said. "We'll monitor." The word landed flat. Monitor meant wait. Wait meant risk. He set the radio down gently, resisting the urge to argue. Arguing burned time. And instead, he turned back to the system, eyes scanning for secondary stress points. The building responded in fragments. Micro delays, uneven loads, a network compensating where it shouldn't have to. It was holding together on habit and luck. Footsteps echoed again, heavier now. 2 members of corporate security appeared at the doorway, posture rigid, expressions rehearsed. "We were told there's unauthorized activity in this hub," one said, gaze already drifting to the child by the wall. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but calculation. "Maintenance review," he replied evenly, "logged and traceable. That's not what we were told. Then you were told wrong." The second guard frowned. "Sir, we need you to step away from the console." He didn't move. He couldn't, yet not without consequences far worse than being escorted out. Another tremor ran through the floor, stronger this time, rattling a loose panel near the ceiling. Dust drifted down in a thin line between them. The guards froze, just for a second. Enough. "That," he said quietly, "is what happens when you choose appearances over systems." The first guard hesitated, radio lifting halfway to his mouth. "Control, we've got—" A sharp tone cut through the room as the console flashed red. Not a full alarm, not yet, but unmistakable. A threshold crossed. Upstairs, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter thinned. Screens hesitated longer than before. Someone swore under their breath when a presentation froze mid-slide. The CEO's jaw tightened as she watched a progress bar crawl where certainty should have been. She demanded answers, fast ones. A control fed her reassurances wrapped in jargon, promising redundancy, promising buffers. She nodded, satisfied on the surface, but something in her posture betrayed impatience. Problems were acceptable. Loss of control was not. Down below, the red light faded back to amber. He exhaled slowly, feeling the strain in his shoulders. He'd prevented a cascade, barely. The guards stared at the console now, uncertainty replacing authority. "You should clear the area," he told them, not unkindly. "If this escalates, you don't want to be standing here." They exchanged a look. Training said remove him. Instinct said listen. The building made the choice for them with another low groan through the walls. They backed out without another word. He moved to his daughter, crouching beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "I might need you to sit tight for a bit. Okay?" She nodded, trusting, fingers clutching the frayed clip on his old lanyard she liked to fidget with. He noticed then how worn it was, the metal dulled from years of use. A relic from a life she knew nothing about. He stood and returned to the console, pulling up deeper system maps. These weren't part of his current job description. They were echoes of old ones. Designs he remembered sketching out in rooms much nicer than this, arguing for margins that had been cut to save money and impress investors. A message flashed across the display, access tightening on executive floors. That was bad. Isolation layered on stress turned inconvenience into traps. Upstairs, the CEO was informed that certain elevators were offline temporarily. Her irritation sharpened. She ordered an override, impatient with caution. The command shot downward like a hammer. He saw it coming. "No," he whispered, already typing. The system bucked, lights strobing as 2 priorities collided. For a heartbeat, everything hung in balance. Then it settled. Not safely, just differently. He stared at the readout, pulse steady despite the stakes. The next failure wouldn't be small. It would be visible, public, and when it came, there would be no hiding behind dashboards or titles. He reached for the radio again, this time pressing the button without hesitation. "You're out of buffer," he said into the quiet channel. "This is your last warning." Upstairs, the CEO felt the building shift under her heels, subtle but undeniable. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across her face. Down below, the man in work boots stood ready, eyes on the system. and knowing the night had crossed the point where being invisible was no longer an option. The warning didn't echo. It sank in, absorbed by layers of concrete and arrogance alike. For a brief, dangerous moment, nothing happened. That was the most deceptive part of failure, the pause that convinced people they'd been right to ignore it. Then the alarms began to layer. Not blaring yet, not enough to send executives running, just enough to confuse. Access panels flashed between green and amber. A security gate on the 22nd floor refused to open, then granted access on the third scan. Somewhere higher up, a server rack spiked past its safe threshold and dumped heat into a cooling loop already stretched thin. He watched it all unfold in real time, fingers hovering, mind racing ahead of the data. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. A system pushed past design limits by people who never learned what limits were for. The radio crackled to life without him touching it. Control again, voice tight now, stripped of earlier dismissal. "We're seeing inconsistencies across multiple floors. Can you confirm?" "I already did," he replied calmly. "You just didn't like the answer." A beat of silence followed, then reluctantly, "What do you need?" "Permission, authority, time." He asked for none of it. "I need you to stop executive overrides," he said. "All of them. Let the system breathe." "That's not your call." "No," he agreed, "but the collapse will be." Down the line, someone swore quietly, the kind of sound people made when reality stopped respecting hierarchy. He turned his attention fully back to the console, isolating subsystems, rerouting load in small, precise increments. Each change bought seconds, sometimes minutes. It wasn't enough to save the building yet, but it was enough to keep it standing. Behind him, his daughter shifted in the chair, the hum of the room growing louder to her ears now. He glanced back, offering a reassuring nod. She smiled, small and brave, and that smile anchored him more than any command structure ever had. Upstairs, the mood fractured. An executive assistant whispered urgently to the CEO, tablet angled low. The words cascading delay and audit exposure floated through the air. The CEO's expression hardened, annoyance bleeding into something sharper. She waved off the assistant and strode toward the glass wall overlooking the city, phone already in hand. Money could fix this. It always did. She made the call. Down below, he saw the incoming vendor access request light up his screen and felt a flash of grim satisfaction. Outsiders wouldn't help. They'd follow scripts. Scripts written for ideal conditions that no longer existed. He denied the request without hesitation. "Facilities, why was that blocked?" Control snapped. "Because they'll make it worse," he said. "And because they don't know this system. I do." "You're a maintenance tech." He allowed himself a thin smile. "Tonight, I'm whatever keeps your lights on." Another alarm chirped, this one louder, sharper, the kind that executives noticed. Upstairs, conversation stopped. Screens froze. A massive display blinked, then went dark entirely. Gasps rippled through the room. The CEO spun, fury flaring. This wasn't how power was supposed to behave. She barked orders, demanded explanations, threatened consequences. None of it mattered. The building didn't respond to threats. Down below, he moved faster now, unburdened by doubt. He opened layers long neglected, bypassed cosmetic safeguards, and addressed the core imbalance directly. Sweat beaded at his temple, but his hand stayed steady. This was familiar territory. This was what he'd been trained for, long before uniforms changed. Security doors on 3 floors locked simultaneously. That did it. The radio exploded with voices talking over each other. Control shouted instructions. Someone from compliance demanded a status report. A panicked voice asked who had authority to direct response. He pressed the transmit button once. The channel fell quiet. "Listen," he said, voice carrying the weight of certainty. "You have a building under stress and people trapped by your own protocols. You can keep pretending this is procedural, or you can let me fix it." Silence followed, long enough to feel the stakes crystallize. Finally, Control spoke again, subdued. "Proceed." That single word shifted everything. He issued instructions, clear and efficient, delegating tasks to people who suddenly found themselves taking orders from the man they'd ignored all night. To their credit, they listened. Systems responded. Slowly, grudgingly, but they responded. Upstairs, the CEO watched as her authority evaporated in real time, replaced by a voice she didn't recognize. For the first time, she asked a question instead of issuing a command. "Who is handling this?" No one answered her immediately. Down below, he allowed himself one controlled breath. This was no longer about staying invisible. It was about finishing what had started. By the way, if you want to see how this moment flips everything, and why the truth can't stay hidden after this, subscribe with the bell on. You won't want to miss what comes next. The word hung in the air. Proceed. And with it came a shift he felt immediately, like weight transferring to his shoulders without asking permission. The console responded as if relieved, data streams aligning when someone finally spoke its language. He didn't waste the moment. He split the system into survivable islands, isolating failures before they could bleed into one another. Cooling loads rerouted. Access hierarchies flattened. Redundant pathways reopened that had been sealed years ago to make reports look cleaner. Each adjustment pulled the building back from the edge by inches, not miles. Voices filled the channel again, but now they waited between sentences. He gave instructions without raising his voice, assigning tasks to departments that had never coordinated directly. People complied because the screens in front of them finally made sense. Behind him, his daughter slid off the chair and sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging her knees. The hum was louder now, vibrating through her bones, but she didn't cry. She watched him instead, eyes steady. He caught her gaze and nodded once. That was all she needed. Upstairs, the executive floors were no longer pristine. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across glass walls. Assistants clustered near stairwells, phones pressed to ears that weren't listening anymore. The CEO stood rigid near the center, arms crossed, jaw clenched, as she watched control slip through gaps she hadn't known existed. "Who is giving these commands?" she demanded, voice sharp. Control hesitated. For the first time, someone chose honesty over comfort. "Facilities," they said. "Maintenance." Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling, as if she could see through concrete and steel. Disbelief flashed, followed by something colder. "Get him off the system." Down below, he anticipated the move before it came. He'd seen power react like this before. First denial, then removal. He locked his session locally, bypassing remote kill commands that assumed he wouldn't know they existed. Control tried once, failed. "He's not responding," someone said, breathless. "He is," another voice countered quietly. "The building is." A new alert flashed. Server room temperature stabilizing. Elevator bank slowly cycling back online. The worst cascade had been interrupted, not solved. Interrupted. He wiped his palms on his pants and leaned closer to the console, tracing one last unstable thread. It led upward, straight into the executive isolation protocol that had been forced earlier. Trapped doors, delayed egress, people boxed in by their own safeguards. "Listen to me," he said into the radio. voice steady but edged now. "You've got people locked in because you panicked. I can open it safely, but only if you stop fighting me." Silence answered. Then footsteps thundered overhead as someone ran. Panic had finally outpaced pride. The CEO felt it then. Not the alarms, but the eyes. Executives looked at her, waiting. For a solution. For permission to trust someone else. That had never happened before. She inhaled sharply and spoke into her phone, each word measured. Let him work. Down below, the system acknowledged the release command. Doors unlocked in sequence, not all at once, preventing a surge that could have tipped everything back into failure. He watched the readouts with hawk focus until the last indicator turned green. A collective exhale rippled through the building. He straightened slowly, spine aching now that adrenaline eased its grip. The immediate crisis had passed. The truth, however, was just beginning to surface. Control's voice returned, different this time. "We need to know who you are." He didn't answer right away. He looked at his daughter, at the old clip she still held in her fingers, worn smooth from years of use, a symbol of a life he'd set down, not lost. "I'm the one who knows how this was built," he said finally, "and how close you came to breaking it." Upstairs, the CEO closed her eyes for half a second. In that brief pause, the memory surfaced. Design reviews long ago. A man who'd argued against cosmetic shortcuts, whose name had disappeared from reports after a quiet departure. Her eyes opened, sharp with recognition. "Bring him up," she said. The summons traveled downward through channels that had only just stopped screaming. He heard it as a shift in tone, not words, a request wrapped in authority, trying to reassert itself after being bent. He didn't respond immediately. He closed out the last diagnostic, saved redundancies locally, and powered down non-essential interfaces with deliberate care. Only then did he turn. His daughter stood, brushing dust from her knees, still clutching the worn clip. He knelt in front of her, lowering himself to her eye level. The building felt different now, quieter in a way that wasn't peace, but restraint. "We're gonna take a little walk," he said softly. "Stay close to me." She nodded, slipping her hand into his without hesitation. The service elevator was waiting, doors open like an apology. As they stepped inside, the lights flickered once, then held. He keyed in the executive level override manually. The elevator began its ascent, smooth but heavy, carrying them toward a world that had never looked down until it needed saving. The higher they rose, the quieter it became. The mechanical hum faded, replaced by the soft whir of cable tension and distant voices leaking through floors. He felt the weight of eyes before he saw them, anticipation thickening the air. When the doors opened, the contrast was jarring. Glass, chrome, soft lighting, everything designed to soothe and impress. Executives lined the corridor, some pretending not to stare, others openly doing so. A few recognized him now, not from his uniform but from the way the building had listened to him. Security hovered uncertainly, no longer sure who outranked whom. At the far end of the hall, the CEO waited. She stood alone, posture rigid, expression carefully neutral. No smile this time, no mockery, just assessment. Her gaze dropped briefly to the child at his side, then returned to his face. "You," she said, as if testing the word. He stopped several feet away, not closing the distance she hadn't invited. Power dynamics still mattered to her. He let them. "The building is stable," he said. "It's all for now." She exhaled through her nose, a controlled release. "You exceeded your role." "Yes." "That could have consequences." He met her eyes steady. so could letting it fail. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone shifted uncomfortably. The glass walls reflected the moment back at itself. Authority challenged, not loudly, but undeniably. She folded her arms, a gesture that once would have ended conversations. "Why didn't we know about you?" He glanced down at his daughter, then back up. "Because I didn't need you to." That landed harder than any accusation. Her jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me." He didn't respond right away. He took a breath, feeling the quiet strength in his chest, the kind that came from choosing restraint over retaliation. "You tried to," he said evenly, "in the lobby." The words hung there, undeniable, and several executives looked away, suddenly interested in their phones or the floor. Her eyes flickered just once. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. "That was inappropriate," she said after a beat. "It was unnecessary," he corrected, "and my daughter heard it." The child shifted slightly, pressing closer to his side. That small movement did more than any speech could have. It reframed everything. The CEO's gaze dropped again, lingering this time. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "Why does she call me that?" He didn't bristle. He didn't soften it either. "Because she sees people as they could be, not as they perform." Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Around them, the witnesses absorbed it all. The humiliation inverted, not with cruelty but with truth. This wasn't a man demanding recognition. This was a father setting boundaries. As she straightened, composure reassembling piece by piece. "You saved the building," she said. "That will be acknowledged." "Good," he replied. "Because what almost broke it needs to be too." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said. "I'm inviting you to look at the system you built, all of it." Another pause. Longer this time. Somewhere behind the glass the city glowed, unaware of how close this tower had come to darkness. Finally, she nodded once, not in defeat, in acceptance. "Walk with me," she said. He hesitated only long enough to make the choice clear. Then he stepped forward, not behind her, not ahead of her, but beside her. The corridor parted as they moved, a quiet acknowledgement rippling outward. The night wasn't over, but the balance had shifted. They walked in measured silence, or footsteps soft against carpet that had never known urgency until tonight. The corridor led them past glass-walled conference rooms where people paused mid-conversation, watching without understanding why the air felt different. He felt it too, the subtle shift when a structure stopped pretending and started revealing itself. The CEO didn't speak at first. She waited until they reached a smaller room near the edge of the executive floor, one usually reserved for private briefings and damage control. The door closed behind them with a muted seal, shutting out the murmurs and the stares. She turned, arms no longer crossed, hands resting on the table as if grounding herself. "I've reviewed the preliminary logs," she said. "Your interventions prevented an audit failure, possibly worse." He nodded once. He didn't thank her. The gratitude flowed upward too easily in places like this. "You also bypassed safeguards," she added. "Protocols exist for a reason. So do limits," he replied. "Yours were cosmetic. The building doesn't care about appearances." Her lips pressed together. For a moment, irritation flared, old instinct, but it faded faster this time. "We're going to have to explain what happened," she said. "Publicly." That was the opening he'd been waiting for, though he showed no sign of it. Then explain all of it. She studied him, really looked now, not the uniform, not the badge, the man who'd stood between failure and survival without asking permission. "You're asking for exposure," she said. "That cuts both ways." Yes, he said simply. Outside the room, executives gathered, tension buzzing through whispered conversations. Control wanted clarity. Compliance wanted narratives. The board wanted reassurance. None of them wanted surprises anymore. Inside, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim data drive, setting it gently on the table. "These are system reports," he said. "Not just tonight, patterns, deferred maintenance, overrides tied to presentation cycles." Her eyes flicked to the drive, then back to him. "You've been collecting this." "I've been noticing it," he corrected. "There's a difference." Silence stretched, thick with implication. She straightened, resolve hardening in a new way. "If this comes out," she said, "it won't just reflect on decisions. It will reflect on leadership." He met her gaze without blinking. "Good." The door opened before she could respond. An assistant stepped in, pale but composed. "The board wants a briefing. Now." She glanced at him. For the first time that night, she didn't issue an order. She asked, "Will you come?" He looked down at his daughter, who had wandered to the window, pressing her forehead lightly to the glass. The city lights reflected in her eyes, bright and curious. He crouched beside her. "Almost done," he murmured. She nodded, trusting, and returned to his side. He stood. "Yes." The boardroom was full when they entered. Conversations died instantly. Faces turned. Some held skepticism, others relief. All of them carried the weight of nearly losing everything. The CEO took her place at the head of the table. She didn't sit, neither did he. She spoke first, outlining the incident with precision stripped of spin. Systems stressed. Protocols overridden. A failure narrowly avoided through direct intervention. "And that intervention," she said, gesturing toward him, "came from someone we failed to listen to." Murmurs rippled through the room. He stepped forward then, not to defend himself, but to finish the picture. He explained the architecture in plain terms, how shortcuts compounded, how tonight was inevitable without change. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. Facts did the work. As he spoke, screens around the room lit up with data pulled directly from his drive. Patterns became undeniable. The room shifted again, this time from shock to reckoning. "By the way, if you're still with me and you want to see how this truth detonates at the highest level, subscribe with the bell on. This next turn is where everything locks in." A board member finally asked the question hanging in the air. "Who are you?" He paused, just long enough. "Someone who helped build systems like this," he said, "before I chose a different priority." Eyes flicked to the child beside him. Understanding dawned in places where empathy had been absent before. The CEO watched it all unfold, expression unreadable. When the room quieted, she spoke again. "We're restructuring effective immediately," she said, "and this time, the people who understand consequences will have a seat at the table." No applause followed, just acceptance. He felt the shift settle, not as triumph, but as alignment. This wasn't about winning. It was about making sure the same mistake couldn't hide again. As the meeting adjourned, executives filed out differently than they'd entered, slower, quieter, thoughtful. Some nodded at him in passing. Others avoided his eyes. He turned to leave, daughter's hand in his, when the CEO spoke once more, softer now. "You didn't have to do this." He looked back, calm and unshaken. "Neither did you," he said. "Next time, choose better." They walked out together, not equals, not enemies, but no longer pretending the gap between power and value was invisible. The night had one more truth left to surface. The boardroom emptied in fragments, not all at once. People lingered near the doors, pretending to review notes or check messages, stealing glances as if the air itself might explain what had just happened. He waited until the last of them filed out before moving, feeling the aftershock of exposure ripple through the floor beneath his feet. The CEO remained behind, standing where the head of the table had been. The room felt smaller without the audience, the glass walls now reflecting only 2 adults and a child who had wandered to the far end, tracing patterns on the polished surface with her fingertip. "This will spread," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "By morning, everyone will know you were the reason this building didn't fail." He didn't respond immediately. He watched the city lights flicker beyond the glass, each one representing a system just as fragile, just as dependent on unseen hands. "That's not what matters," he said at last. She studied him, something like frustration crossing her face, not at him, but at herself. "It does in my world. And that," he replied evenly, "is the problem." She inhaled, slow and deliberate. "You're forcing accountability." "I'm forcing visibility," he corrected. "Accountability is what happens after." Outside the room, high voices rose again as legal teams and consultants gathered, already reshaping language, preparing defenses. He could feel the instinct to contain, to redirect blame downward or outward. It was a reflex born of years without consequence. The CEO glanced toward the door, then back at him. "They'll want a name," she said. "A position. Something that fits." He shook his head once. "I don't fit anymore. That's kind of the point." His daughter looked up at that, sensing the shift. She walked back to his side and leaned into him, small and solid. He rested a hand on her shoulder, grounding himself. "What do you want?" the CEO asked. The question surprised her as much as him. It wasn't framed as negotiation or demand. It was genuine, uncertain. He considered it. Not the obvious answers. Promotion, recognition, restitution, but the quieter ones. "I want the systems fixed," he said. "Not patched. I want the people who keep this place alive to be heard before alarms start screaming. And I want her," he nodded toward his daughter, "to grow up seeing that dignity isn't assigned by title." She absorbed that, eyes narrowing not in defense but in focus. "You're asking for cultural change. I'm asking you to stop pretending culture is accidental." A faint, humorless smile tugged at her mouth. "You know how rare it is for someone to walk away from power and still talk like this." "Yes," he said simply. "That's why I did." She turned toward the window, arms folding loosely, posture less rigid than before. "When I was her age," she said, voice distant, "I learned early that warmth was inefficient." He didn't comment. He let the silence hold space for something that wasn't strategy. Minutes passed before a knock came at the door. A senior legal advisor stepped in, stopping short when she saw him still there. "We're drafting a statement," the advisor said. "We need alignment." The CEO didn't look away from the window. "Draft the truth," she said. "For once." The advisor hesitated, clearly unused to that instruction, then nodded and withdrew. The room settled again. He checked the time, then looked down at his daughter. "You hungry?" She nodded enthusiastically, the tension finally slipping from her shoulders. He turned toward the CEO. "We're leaving." She faced him, something unreadable in her expression. "This isn't finished." "No," he agreed, "but it started." As they walked toward the exit, the corridor outside felt different than before. Conversations stopped as they passed, not from mockery now, but from recalibration. People were reassessing what they thought they knew about value, about a hierarchy, about who saved whom. One executive stepped aside deliberately to give them space. Another nodded, tentative but sincere. He acknowledged neither overtly, but he felt the shift. Respect that hadn't been requested carried a different weight. They reached the elevators. This time, the doors opened immediately. As they descended, the building felt quieter, steadier. Not healed, but aware. Awareness was the first step toward change. When the doors opened onto the lobby, the marble floor looked the same, but the energy didn't. The security guards who had watched him earlier stood straighter now, eyes following him with something like understanding. He didn't look for the spot where she'd humiliated him. He didn't need to, and that moment no longer owned him. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp with the promise of rain. He breathed it in deeply, savoring the simple relief of being done, for now. Above them, the tower glowed, a little less arrogant, a little more honest. The truth had surfaced. What happened next would decide whether it stayed that way. The rain started as they reached the curb, a light mist at first, more suggestion than storm. He paused, glancing back once as the tower loomed above them, its light steady now, obedient in a way they hadn't been hours earlier. The building looked calm from the outside. That was the illusion. Inside, everything was still shifting. A black sedan pulled up before he could take another step. The window lowered, revealing the CEO in the back seat, her expression composed but not detached. "Get in," she said. It wasn't a command this time. It was an offer framed by necessity. He hesitated, weighing instinct against consequence. His daughter looked up at him, curious, rain dotting her hair. He opened the door and helped her inside, then slid in beside her. The door closed with a soft seal, shutting out the night. The car moved before either of them spoke. "We're not done," the CEO said finally, eyes forward. "The board wants answers, real ones, and they want them now." "They already got the beginning," he replied. "What they do with it is on them." She exhaled slowly. "You destabilized more than systems tonight." He didn't deny it. "They were already unstable, I just stopped pretending otherwise." The car slowed as traffic thickened near the financial district. Sirens wailed in the distance, unrelated, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. His daughter leaned against him, eyelids heavy now that the adrenaline had faded. "There will be consequences," the CEO continued. "For me, for them, for you." "Good," he said. "Consequences mean the truth landed." She glanced at him then, really looked. "You could have stayed invisible," she said. "Fixed things quietly, why didn't you?" He considered the question, not as challenge but as reflection. Because quiet fixes keep loud mistakes alive. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a nearby hotel, where the board had relocated for emergency deliberations. The doors opened onto fluorescent light and concrete, a mirror of the spaces he'd spent most of his working life in. The irony wasn't lost on him. They stepped out together. Security nodded them through without hesitation. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, stripped of ceremony. Board members clustered around tables, scattered with documents and glowing screens. Conversations hushed as they entered. This wasn't a boardroom built for performance. It was built for damage control. The CEO took the floor immediately, outlining the events again, this time without polish. She didn't soften her role, she didn't deflect. That alone shifted the room. Then she gestured to him. "This," she said, "is the man who understood our systems better than we did." Eyes turned. Some skeptical, some impressed, some calculating. He spoke next, not with accusation but with clarity. He laid out the chain of decisions, The shortcuts normalized over time, the way metrics replaced understanding. He explained how tonight had been inevitable, not exceptional. Each sentence tightened the room, forcing listeners to confront their own fingerprints on the problem. A board member interrupted, voice sharp. "Why wasn't this flagged sooner?" "It was," he answered calmly, "just not by people you listened to." Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. Another board member cleared their throat. "What would you change?" He didn't hesitate. "I'd start by listening to the people who maintain your reality, not just when alarms go off." The CEO watched him closely, something like respect settling into her posture. The discussion stretched on, questions turning from defensive to exploratory. Plans began to form. Not cosmetic ones, but structural. Committees were reimagined. Reporting lines questioned. For the first time, maintenance wasn't an afterthought in the conversation. As the meeting wound down, exhaustion settled over the room. Not the tiredness of long hours, but the deeper fatigue of confronting truth. The CEO approached him as others filtered out. "You didn't just expose a failure," she said quietly. "You changed the narrative." He looked down at his daughter, now asleep against his side. "Narratives don't matter," he said. "Outcomes do." She nodded, accepting the distinction. "Then help us make sure this sticks." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Only if you're ready to lose some comfort." A faint smile crossed her face, wry and honest. "I think I already did." They stepped out into the garage again, the rain heavier now, drumming against concrete. He felt the night closing around them, not in threat, but in promise. The crisis had passed. The reckoning hadn't. The rain followed them out of the garage, heavier now, turning the pavement into a mirror that fractured the city lights. He adjusted his grip on his daughter as they stepped under the awning, her breathing slow and even against his chest. The meeting had drained what little tension she'd been holding onto. For him, the weight was different. It pressed inward, settling where decisions lived. Behind them, the CEO stopped. She didn't call out. She waited. He felt it anyway. The pause, the unspoken need for closure, and turned back. The street noise softened between them, as if the city itself sensed the moment mattered. Her posture was no longer defensive or commanding. It was careful, measured. Someone standing at the edge of something they hadn't planned to face. "They'll push back," she said quietly. "Not publicly, not yet, but they'll try to reframe this, minimize it." "I know," he replied. "That's what systems do when they're scared." She nodded once. "You didn't take anything they offered." "I didn't come for anything," he said. "I came because the building was breaking." "That's not entirely true," she said, studying him. "You came because someone crossed a line." He didn't deny it this time. He looked down briefly at the child in his arms, then back at her. "Some lines don't belong to you to test." A flash of something passed across her face. Shame, recognition, maybe regret. "I thought authority meant distance," she said. "That warmth blurred judgment." "And now?" he asked. "And now I'm realizing distance blurs consequences," she said softly. Silence stretched again, not strained this time, reflective. Across the street, a security guard from the tower stepped out of a booth, umbrella in hand. He hesitated, then crossed over and held it out. Not to the CEO, but to the man with the child. "Sir," he said simply. He accepted it with a nod, surprised by the small, human gesture. The guard smiled faintly and retreated without another word. The CEO watched that exchange closely. "It's already changing," she murmured. "Only if you let it," he replied. Headlights swept across them as a car slowed at the curb. Not the black sedan this time, something simpler. He adjusted his stance, careful not to wake his daughter. "This isn't forgiveness," he said before she could speak again. "What you said in the lobby, that stays with a kid, you don't erase that with policy." She swallowed, the truth landing fully now. "I know. But," he continued, voice steady, "what happens after this can teach her something else, that people can own their mistakes, and that power can learn." She nodded, slow and deliberate. "I'll make sure of it." For the first time, he believed she meant it, not because she wanted redemption, but because she understood the cost of failing again. The car door opened. He stepped back under the umbrella, rain tapping steadily above them. The city smelled clean, washed down to something more honest. As he moved toward the car, she spoke once more. "You never told me why you left." He paused, then answered without turning. "Because the job stopped being about building things that lasted." She watched him go, the words settling deep. Inside the car, warmth replaced the chill. He buckled his daughter in carefully, brushing damp hair from her forehead. She stirred slightly, then smiled in her sleep, unaware of how close the world had come to showing her its worst. He leaned back as the car pulled away, watching the tower recede through rain-streaked glass. It looked smaller now, less imposing. Just another structure held together by people who either cared or didn't. That was the difference. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message preview lit the screen, an internal notice already circulating, acknowledging critical contributions from facilities leadership and announcing a full systems review. No names yet. That would come. He powered the screen off without reading further. Tonight wasn't about recognition. It was about alignment, between what people pretended mattered and what actually kept the lights on. As the car merged into traffic, he rested his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the exhaustion finally surface. Tomorrow would bring questions, offers, pressures. He'd face them when they arrived. For now, he listened to the rain, steady and real, and held on to the quiet certainty that something fundamental had shifted. Not because a CEO had been humbled, but because a child had been protected. Morning came softly, the way it always did after nights that rearranged things. He woke to pale light filtering through thin curtains, the city quieter than it had been hours earlier, as if it too was recovering. His daughter slept curled beside him, one arm thrown over his chest, breathing slow and steady. He stayed still, honoring the moment. When she finally stirred, she smiled without opening her eyes. That smile carried none of the confusion from the lobby, none of the tension from the alarms, just trust. He brushed a thumb across her hair and felt something settle deep inside him, something that hadn't existed before last night. Not relief, resolution. They moved through the morning gently. Breakfast from a corner place that knew his name. A paper napkin folded into a clumsy crown that made her laugh. Outside, the tower loomed in the distance, unchanged in silhouette, altered in spirit. News alerts flickered across screens and passing windows, headlines careful but unmistakable. Systems review announced. Leadership accountability pledged. No faces yet. No villains named. That was fine. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Messages stacked. Numbers he didn't recognize, addresses that suddenly mattered. Offers, invitations, quiet acknowledgments from people who had finally connected the dots. He scrolled past them without answering, pocketed the phone, and took her hand. They walked instead. Later, when he did look, one message stood out. Not an offer. A note from a facilities worker he barely knew, thanking him for saying what no one else had been allowed to say, for being seen. He typed a short reply and sent it before overthinking could get in the way. At the tower, changes were already visible. Temporary signs rerouted traffic through service corridors once ignored. Meetings spilled into spaces that had never hosted decisions before. People listened differently now, less to titles, more to explanations. It wouldn't last on its own. He knew that. Change never did without pressure, but pressure existed now. Across town, the CEO stood before a smaller audience than she was used to, voice steady, words chosen without insulation. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't dramatize. She named the failure and the lesson, and she did it without looking away. It cost her something. That, too, mattered. By midday, the story had spread beyond the building. Commentators argued about hierarchy and labor, about invisibility and competence. Some missed the point entirely. That was expected. The truth didn't need consensus to exist. He picked his daughter up from school that afternoon, earlier than usual. She ran to him, backpack bouncing, and launched into a story about a classmate and a missing crayon. The world had already narrowed back down to what mattered. As they walked home, she asked a simple question, the kind that slipped past defenses. Was she mad at you? He considered it, then answered honestly. She was scared. Did you help her? Yes. Good, she said, satisfied. Everyone needs help sometimes. He smiled at that, because it was the most accurate summary of the last 24 hours anyone had offered. That night, after she fell asleep again, he stood by the window and looked out at the city. The lights blinked steadily. Systems held. People worked unseen as they always had. The difference was that now, someone had listened when it counted. This wasn't a story about a man proving he was more than his uniform. It wasn't about a CEO being put in her place. It was about what happened when dignity refused to stay quiet, and when a child's trust forced the truth into the open. Before we end, I want to hear from you. Ask me for the next story title you want explored. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad took his drunk boss home, her one. Question the next morning shattered his life forever. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?